You know when you experience sudden, devastating shock and despair? We use that phrase, the bottom fell out of my world. Well, I've not been very well over these last few weeks, and the world has fallen out of my bottom. I won't go into specifics, but just to say that I have had very little to look forward to, except for one package that I ordered, a couple of weeks ago now, and that package was the Nintendo DSi XL. Now, I'm not like some of you, I don't have any nostalgia for these old DS, DSi, DS Lite units. I was an adult when these things were brought to market. I suppose my formative years came through 8-bit and 16-bit computers like the Commodore 64 and the Amiga. I was going to Debenhams at Christmas time, and I'd see a stand where they'd had a Nintendo Entertainment System, and I played Mario for half an hour whilst my parents tried to drag me away so they could look at the perfume or clothes or perfume made from cloves. So I understand the appeal of these devices, but I've just got no nostalgia for the consoles themselves. In fact, I played a Nintendo DS game for the very first time this year. So when I got the Thor a few weeks ago, I hadn't had much experience with these systems. I had bought a 2DS XL earlier in the year, but modding that turned out to be a bit of a nightmare. For me, anyway. I know your mileage may vary. The previous owner's Nintendo Network ID was welded onto this console, like some sort of digital barnacle. I didn't have the password, I didn't have the PIN, their Mii's took up permanent residence in my new console, paying no rent whatsoever. Their friends list is still etched onto the system like graffiti on a motorway bridge, as were all of their images. It was almost like buying a house and then discovering that you're legally obliged to keep the previous family's photos on their walls and water their plants twice a week. But I should say, I did manage to mod the thing eventually. I can use the unit if I want, but after all of the fuss and the hassle, I kind of felt a bit sour about the whole Nintendo handheld experience. But with the release of the RGDS, I knew I had to give the original hardware one more chance. I wanted to know what I've been missing all these years, so I ordered this Nintendo DSi XL, because it's roughly the same size as the RGDS. And I've been told some wonderful things about these units, and this one in particular. The fact that it's got a proper IPS display. The fact that even though there's no actual upscaling going on, it doesn't matter because the pictures look absolutely phenomenal. I was told that the sound is good because they're coming out of speakers that are pointing towards your face instead of pointing towards your stomach. But I'm also somebody who's been very rooted in emulation over the last year. And that means that there are things that I know I am just going to miss. Save states, especially on Mario, but save states, fast forwards, you forget how slowly the text scrolls in Pokemon, or how long those random battles take until you can't hold down a button to speed through them. But right now, the Nintendo DS line of consoles is the cheapest way to play this catalogue. You can easily mod it with just an SD card, so you can play whatever DS, DSi or Game Boy Advance games you want. I had to test this thing out. Because if you're going to buy a Nintendo DS in 2026, then you have to know there are things that could go horribly wrong with it. These are not new units. Some of them are 20 years old already. So should you ditch these newfangled emulation devices and buy yourself some original hardware? Let's find out if this really is a link to the past, or if our princess is in another castle. The DS was an incredibly important console for Nintendo. We forget about it now. But back in the mid-2000s, when the company wasn't doing quite as well, it was sales of Nintendo DS and its catalogue that actually propped Nintendo up financially. Flash forward to today, and these consoles are still incredibly well sought after on the open market. And I can see why people recommended them so enthusiastically. But in 2026, the DS landscape has changed quite a bit from the days when these were found on the cheap in charity shops. You actually have 4 flavours of DS, but I chose the DSi XL for a few reasons. Firstly, this is roughly the same as the RGDS, so this seemed like a proper point of comparison. Secondly, you have beautiful screens here. The XL has nearly twice the screen size over the original units, and it's almost certain that you'll get IPS panels on these as well, which means bright, clear images and excellent viewing angles. That's a stark difference to any of the DSs that have the old TN screens. And finally, there's the battery life, which is very respectable at about 6 to 8 hours. You've got solid build quality, you've got front-facing speakers which sound really good. What's not to like? And searching around a lot of forums before buying this thing, I watched a ton of videos about the DS catalogue, about which ones are good and which ones aren't. The DSi XL comes out on top in many, many cases. The only difference is if you want to play Game Boy Advanced games with the original cartridges. In that case, the only options are the original Fat DS or the DS Lite, because those have got ports that let you do it. But in 2026, you're really going to be wanting to mod these things and loading games from the SD card. And I got mine for £50, which is about $65, and that didn't come with a stylus or charging cable, but those were dirt cheap to pick up on Amazon. And when it arrived, it was in really good condition, and I wasn't expecting that because this is one of the cheaper units. And despite the pictures, I was expecting it to be, all scratched up and have pitted screens. But what I'm saying here that I was very, very lucky to get something for that price in this good a condition. If you're a little bit more adventurous, you could always choose the DSi LL units, and those are the ones that are actually from Japan. They go from $50 to $65, and the menus are in Japanese. The great thing is, during the modding process, you end up booting into a launcher thing called Twilight Menu, when the launcher is in English, so it's not a problem at all. The Japanese units were generally owned by adults rather than children, so a lot of these are in much better condition than you would find on the American market, though they are more prone to yellowing, especially on the bottom screen, due to humidity. The first thing that I noticed when I picked up the XL was the weight. It's heavier than you'd expect, but it doesn't feel hollow or cheap. It feels like somebody actually cared about what they were making. The build quality is particularly satisfying, especially the hinges which lock into two positions, and on my unit it all seemed fairly solid. There's this lovely mechanical click when you open it, and it stays where you put it. When you're in the middle of the hokey-cokey and you shake it all about, the DSi XL will only give you a modicum of wobble. And this is actually a benefit over those DS units, which can get a sort of floppy sadness when the screen just sort of drifts around whenever gravity takes effect. You suddenly understand why people get enthusiastic about this particular device. Most of the unit has this lovely matte finish, and my unit has a sort of stay-at-home mum style wine colour, which I have to admit I didn't like in the promotional pictures, but when I'm holding it in my hand, it looks an awfully lot more impressive in real life. The top lid is laminated, which is a magnet for fingerprints, and it seems to collect scratches and marks if you just look at it funny. I've got a couple of scratches on mine, but they're actually not very visible. This is the sort of thing that you'd want to check if you're buying a unit for yourself. The buttons are properly tactile, the D-pad uses micro switches so it's clicky and it's responsive rather than mushy. I've been playing through some of the 2D platformers and the precision is lovely. The button layout means that your thumb falls naturally where it needs to be without any stretching or awkward hand positioning. The face buttons are also micro switches, meaning that you get that satisfying tactile feedback with every press. It's a lovely, lovely experience. The shoulder buttons too have this satisfying click to them, and everything feels deliberate and well constructed. Battery life on this thing can actually be anything up to 17 hours, depending on the screen brightness. Mostly, if you're at the lowest screen brightness, you'll get 17 hours. But assume you're going to get around about 6 to 8 hours at a normal brightness. The original batteries are getting on a bit now, so you may have to replace them eventually, but luckily it's not too difficult to do that, and you can pick up a new battery for around about $20. The audio is surprisingly different. You've got the front-facing speakers, which I could keep talking about, and you've got a headphone jack that does everything you would expect a headphone jack to do without any issues. It's one of the areas that I think these particular units handle very well, and honestly, I'm pretty impressed with the loudness and the quality of this thing. You've got two 4.2-inch screens here running at 256 by 192 pixels, and on the XL the screens were 40% larger than the original DS. But there's no upscaling going on here. What we've got here instead is native resolution. You don't get any sense that the picture looks fuzzy at all, but it can be a little bit pixelated. But what we're talking about here are games that are from an era where developers worked pixelation into every art that they were creating. And the games on here look absolutely gorgeous. I've been working my way through Mario Kart and New Super Mario Brothers, sorry, and it's been a fantastic experience. And the thing that immediately stands out is how responsive everything feels. Platformers live or die on whether the controls can keep up with what you're trying to do. And this will, of course, work exactly as it should have done, and exactly as it would have done back in 2006. There's no slight delay when you're wondering if your input is registered. It's immediate, and that makes all the difference when you're trying to land tricky jumps or pull off wall kicks. Sonic Rush is brilliant for exactly the same reason. The game moves incredibly fast, and on other screens, even other DS screens, you'd run into a blurry mess. This game, even at the time, was known as the screen killer because it made a mess of those old TN screens. On these IPS panels, however, it's beautiful. It is sharp, responsive, it does exactly what it says on the tin. And when I've tried out games like Chrono Trigger or Ace Attorney, I'm finding that the pixel art becomes vibrant and clear. And because of the large screens, you can actually read the text properly without squinting or dialogue. I'm getting on a bit. These things are important. One thing you'll probably do, however, is mod this. And that means installing something like Twilight Menu, which bypasses the original DSi launcher. You boot into that instead of the original, you browse games stored on your SD card, and then you select which game you want to play. But once you're actually in the game, once you're actually playing, you're getting that pure DS experience that we've just been talking about. And, I'm hoping to make an idiot's guide to modding in the very near future. So if you'd like a guide about modding your DSi from an idiot, then look out for that. Now, I may be painting too rosy a picture of getting this original hardware because it's not without its issues or without its limitations. I am really into emulation, and the fact is that you do miss out. You're getting things in emulation like save states. You're giving up fast forward to use this thing, or rewind, because some people like that, and cheats and graphical hats and all of those quality of life things that make emulation great. And one of the games this has been most annoying to me on was New Super Mario Bros. Because you can't save your progress on a single world. You've got to wait until you get to the right point. And that's painful. These things were painful back in the day when these were originally released. I remember the same problem on Super Mario World. But as an adult, you often just have to put down what you're doing and go and deal with a fire happening somewhere, or somebody's fallen over, or the puppy's exploded in the strawberry patch. But if you do that on this console, you could very well lose your place and have to start again. Whereas with emulation, a quick couple of button presses and a save state means that you can come back to the exact place you left off at the moment that you return. And the lack of emulation functions isn't the only place where you might face difficulties. These units are, at most 20 years old for the older DS units. Things of this age are much more prone to failure than modern alternatives. I was more prone to failure at 20 years old, but they do these little blue tablets now. The battery is the most obvious weak point here. The good news is that replacement batteries are cheap and readily available on Amazon or eBay. But you should be wary of buying unbranded grey batteries because often those die within weeks or months. One brand that I've seen get almost universal praise, though, is Cameron Cena, so look out for those if you do need to change your battery. These units can also have hinge problems. Yes, that is right. Hinge issues are not the sole purview of modern emulation devices. They're prone to cracking, especially around the right-hand side. You're looking at a repair with these things that requires either significant expense or a complete shell replacement. And for most casual users, a cracked hinge is essentially game over for that particular console. The touchscreen has its issues too, losing sensitivity over time. The digitizer itself is only about $5 to $8 to replace, but installing it is a nightmare for the casual user. It involves hairdryers, glue, and the sort of patience that is usually reserved for defusing bombs. It's doable, but it's not fun. But I don't want you to think that any of this spells doom and gloom for a modern DS buyer. These are still fun devices to get your hands on, as long as you take a little bit of care when you're choosing one. So what you need to do is watch out for yellowing, especially on the Japanese units. Mine actually has a tiny little bit of yellowing on the bottom screen already, but honestly, I don't notice it whilst playing, so I was kind of happy to say, all right, I'll go with that one. The hinges, you really need to check the hinges on both sides, but particularly the right side where the crack seems to appear. Give the shoulder buttons a proper test as well. And if you're having to blow into the shoulder buttons to make them work, which is a way of sort of fixing them a little bit, they're dying and you might want to put that to one side. Regular DS cartridges are region-free. DSi enhanced games like Pokemon Black and White are locked unless you mod the console. And watch out for certain retailers charging nearly $200 for these things when eBay's got them for half that. I started this video asking if you should buy one of these units in 2026, because at the time of recording, we are weeks away from the new year. And if you want to play DSi games or DS games right now, then the Nintendo DS in any one of its forms is going to be the cheapest way of doing it. On the horizon are consoles like the Anbernic RGDS, but so far it looks like that's going to be a very compromised experience. But I do know that Gamma is working on his OS for that system. We'll see what happens. And the Thor, of course. The Thor is fantastic. It's amazing, but you're paying an awful lot of money that you might not have to lay out if you just want access to this catalogue and the GBA one. For $85 to $100, you can pick up one of these DSi XLs, and I think it probably is the best way to experience this library. Modding is simple, but for that you get really nice IPS panels most of the time, a library with over 2,000 games, and hardware that plays them properly. Of course, you need to understand what you're going to give up over emulation, but you're playing these games the way that they were originally meant to be played. And for some people, that is the point. Because sometimes the best device for playing DS games in 2026 turns out to be the exact same device that we were playing in 2009. If you don't mind dealing with hardware that's old enough to have a driver's license, you should probably pick one up. That's what I think, anyway. And I would love to know what you think in the comments below. It's been really excellent getting to grips with this particular unit, and I think I'm going to try and use it a little bit more. But that's it for this video. If you would like to see more like this, then do hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you ever so much for watching. And as we head towards the new year, I mean, we're a little bit of a way off, but, we're going to get there. There's only one thing that I'd like to leave you with, and that is happy gaming.